I've got two stories for you guys. You guys seem to like my stories, and I think these are two good stories. A Seaworld story and a dog drop-off story. So when I first started the business, if you wanted to do the board and train, I'd pick up and drop off your dog. So this is somewhere in, I think it was La Jolla, California. Pick up the dog, train the dog. I'm returning the dog. The people weren't going to be there, which doesn't happen a lot, but it's happened from time to time. They weren't going to be there, and they're just like, put my dog in the backyard. So I'm like, okay, I forgot the address but on the way there, but I'm like, I'll remember the house. And it wasn't like a lot of these houses where they all look the same. It was like kind of a unique house, so I was like, I'll remember it. I get to the house, and I'm like, this is the house. I take the dog, I put the dog in the backyard, close the gate, and I'm walking away, and I look back, and the dog's looking at me funny. And I look at him, and I'm like, why is he looking at me like that? I'm like, well, he's whatever. Hasn't been home in 2 weeks, whatever. So I walk away, then I see that there's cars in the driveway, and it kind of looks like someone's there. So I'm like, oh, they weren't supposed to be here, but maybe it's like, who knows? It seems like someone's living there. I knock on the door, and it's people I don't know, and I'm like, oh, it's probably the in-laws. And I go, hey guys, I left your dog in the backyard. And they look at me and they go, we don't have a dog. And I was like, oh, sorry, go get the dog. The houses were unique houses, but there were two houses built that looked the exact same, right next to each other. So I put the dog in the house next door, left him in the backyard, and darn near left. People are going to come home and be like, who's this dog in my backyard? So that's the first story, leaving a dog in the backyard, almost leaving. Second story is the time that I completely forgot my lines at Shamu Stadium, and it was my first show ever. So when you first start at Seaworld, you do the talking part. People think the person talking is the person who is like the manager almost. And this is back in the day when they had your face on a big screen that was about 50 feet high. So your face was 50 feet high. They were zoomed in on your face. When you're new, you do the talking part. When you're senior, you do the swimming part with the whales. I was new. I'd been there maybe a month. I'd learned my lines. I'd gotten approved, and I was out doing my first show. This is July in Orlando at Shamu Stadium in '05. This is when it was packed. There was probably 6,000 people in the stadium. I go out, they're zoomed into my head, and I'm saying my lines, and I completely forget my lines. My first show ever. And I freeze, and I just stare at the camera, and everyone's quiet. 5,000 people are like, this dude completely forgot his lines. And they start feeding me the lines from the back. But I can't even hear them. And I simply then just go, and this is so-and-so and Shamu, and walk off. I froze up. I froze up for like a long time. It was not a short amount of time. Everybody knew. And I went to the back, and the trainers were looking at me like, oh my God. The problem with it is, it was my first show ever. Everyone messes up their lines at some point. If it was show number 10 or show number 100, it wouldn't have been, I never completely recovered from that. Like in a way, I always had anxiety about doing show lines. I would much rather swim with the whales than talk the show because it was my first thing. Pathways in your brain are formed. So when something's firsts are very important in life. When you mess up your first time, when there's no pathways of success built or formed in your brain, it creates this weird thing where then there's like a hiccup every time in a way. And I can't say I ever totally got over that. So those are my two stories. Me messing up my show lines in my first show ever in front of 6,000 people, a third of an NBA basketball stadium, completely messing up my lines, and almost leaving a dog in the backyard of the wrong house. Those are my stories. Comment, like, subscribe, hit the bell, whatever you want.